The silence in the Sterling mansion was a disease. It crept through the marble halls, climbed the grand staircase, and settled like a shroud over the master bedroom. For 3 months, Isabella Sterling had not felt the touch of her husband, Adrian. The man who once couldn't keep his hands off her now flinched if their fingers brushed. He was Adrian Sterling, a titan of industry, whose name commanded respect, yet in the presence of his own pregnant wife, he was a ghost. She told herself it was stress, the pressure of his empire. But as his coldness grew, a terrifying question began to bloom in the dark. What sin had she committed that made her own husband recoil from the very child he claimed to want? The answer was far more sinister than she could ever imagine. The Sterling name wasn't just old money, it was dynastic. Adrian Sterling, however, was a paradox, a man born to privilege who worked with the ferocity of a starved wolf. He'd taken his family's respectable real estate firm and forged it into Sterling Global, a behemoth that devoured skylines and reshaped cities. He was brilliant, ruthless, and until recently, utterly besotted with his wife, Isabella. Isabella Rossi had been a rising star in the art world, a curator with an uncanny eye for talent. She met Adrian at a gallery opening, and their connection was immediate and electric. He was drawn to her passion and authenticity, a stark contrast to the transactional relationships he was used to. She was captivated by the vulnerability hidden beneath his corporate armor. Their wedding was the stuff of legends, a fairy tale union of power and art. For 2 years, their life was an idyllic whirlwind. Then came the pregnancy. The positive test should have been the pinnacle of their joy. Adrian had been ecstatic, lifting her into his arms, his laughter echoing in their cavernous living room. He'd promised her the world, a safe and beautiful life for their child. The change began subtly, a week after the first trimester began. It started with a small, almost imperceptible flinch when she reached for his hand in bed. He'd pulled away, muttering something about a late-night email. Isabella, basking in the glow of early motherhood, thought nothing of it. But a week later, he moved his pillows to the far edge of their king-sized bed. The space between them grew from inches to a chasm. He stopped kissing her good night, replacing the intimate gesture with a clipped, "Sleep well, Isabella." He never touched her belly. Not once. When the baby first kicked, she had cried out in joy, grabbing his hand to feel it. He had snatched it back as if her skin were his face a mask of something she couldn't decipher. Not anger, but something closer to fear. "Adrian, what is it?" she'd asked, her voice trembling. "Did you feel it?" "That was our baby." "I have a conference call," he'd said. His voice tight, his back already turned, as he walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the miracle happening inside her. The emotional distance soon became a physical one. He began working later, often coming home after she was asleep. The shared breakfasts they once cherished were replaced by a note from his assistant detailing his schedule. The mansion, once their shared sanctuary, became her gilded cage. Her primary companion became Adrian's mother, Beatrice Sterling. A woman sculpted from ice and disapproval, Beatrice had never fully endorsed the marriage. She saw Isabella's artistic spirit not as a virtue, but as a flighty, unsuitable trait for a Sterling bride. "Pregnancy can be so taxing on a man, dear," Beatrice said one afternoon, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she watched Isabella struggle to arrange flowers. "Adrian is building an empire. He needs his focus. The messiness of it all can be distracting for a man of his caliber. It's not messy, Beatrice. It's a baby." Isabella countered, her patience wearing thin. "His baby." Beatrice simply smiled, a thin, cutting motion of her lips. "Of course, dear," Just be sure not to overwhelm him with your needs. The isolation was suffocating. Isabella's friends intimidated by the sterling wealth, and Adrian's increasingly cold demeanor began to drift away. She tried to busy herself with designing the nursery, a wonderland of soft creams and gentle animal motifs, but the joy was hollow. Every tiny sock, every miniature blanket was a painful reminder of the partner she was losing. One night, desperation clawed at her. She put on the silk negligee he'd bought her on their honeymoon in Positano, a whisper of fabric that had once driven him mad. She waited for him in the living room, the city lights twinkling below their penthouse window. He walked in just after midnight, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He saw her, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of the old Adrian appeared in his eyes, a spark of desire and love. But it was extinguished as quickly as it came, replaced by that same guarded, pained expression. "Isabella, you should be in bed," he said, his voice flat. He walked past her, not even glancing at her attire, and headed straight for the bar to pour a scotch. Tears welled in her eyes. "I wanted to see you. I miss you, Adrian. We never talk anymore. You won't even look at me." He gripped the crystal tumbler so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I'm busy. The acquisition in Tokyo is taking all my time." "This isn't about Tokyo," she cried, her voice breaking. "This started when I became pregnant. Do you not want this baby anymore? Is that it? Did you change your mind?" He turned to face her, his face a landscape of torment. "Don't be ridiculous. Everything I do is for this family." "Then why won't you touch me?" She whispered, the question hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Why do you look at me like I'm a stranger, or worse, like I'm diseased?" His composure finally cracked. A raw anguish flashed across his face. "You don't understand." He ground out his voice, hoarse. "I am protecting you. I am protecting this family. Just do as I say. Rest, stay healthy, and don't ask me these questions again." He downed the scotch in one go and retreated to the guest bedroom, a room he now occupied more than their own. The heavy click of the door shutting was the sound of her heart breaking. It wasn't an affair. She was almost certain of that. It was something deeper, something colder, and it was inexplicably tied to the child growing within her. The days bled into weeks, each one a carbon copy of the last. The chasm between them widened until it felt uncrossable. Isabella began to feel like a ghost in her own home, haunting the periphery of her husband's life. The only evidence of his care came in the form of sterile third-party actions. A world-renowned obstetrician was hired, a nutritionist planned her every meal, and a prenatal yoga instructor visited the mansion twice a week. He was providing for her body, but starving her soul. Her mind left to fester. In the silence began to invent scenarios. The most logical and most painful was another woman. Had he reconnected with someone from his past, someone more suited to his world of cutthroat business and cold calculation? Her suspicion began to center on a name she hadn't heard in years. Genevieve Dubois. Genevieve had been Adrian's college girlfriend, and for a time his business partner. She was sharp, ambitious, and as Beatrice had once gleefully informed Isabella, the one that got away. Their breakup had been acrimonious, tied to a business disagreement, where Adrian had ultimately triumphed, pushing her out of a lucrative early venture. Isabella knew it was a long shot, but she was desperate for an explanation. Any explanation that wasn't about her or the baby. One evening, driven by a need for answers, she did something she had never done before she went into Adrian's home office. The room was a monument to his success, sleek, minimalist, and impersonal. She sat in his leather chair, the scent of his cologne still lingering. Her fingers hovered over his laptop before she pulled back, unable to breach that final wall of privacy. Instead, her eyes scanned the room. On his desk, nestled between a stack of financial reports and a blueprint for a new tower, was his personal tablet. It was unlocked. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was a betrayal of his trust, but he had already shattered hers. With trembling hands, she opened his messages. She scrolled through conversations with executives, lawyers, and his mother. Then she saw it. A thread with a name she didn't recognize, G.D. The messages were cryptic. G.D. Any change, Adrian? No. The protocol is difficult, but I'm maintaining it. G.D. You're doing the right thing, Adrian. It's the only way to ensure a positive outcome. Adrian. It's tearing me apart. She looks at me, and I see nothing but confusion in her eyes. G.D. Steel yourself. A few months of hardship for a lifetime of health. Remember what's at stake. Isabella's blood ran cold. Protocol. A positive outcome. It sounded clinical, detached. Who was G.D. and what hold did she have over him? She scrolled up her breath, catching in her throat as she found an earlier message. G.D. The preliminary report from the European lab is in. It's what we feared. We need to talk immediately. I've booked a flight. Attached was a file, but it was encrypted, impossible to open. The date of that message corresponded almost exactly to the day Adrian's behavior had changed. It was the proof she needed. He wasn't just having an affair. He was conspiring with this woman about the baby. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place a few days later. Beatrice was visiting, overseeing the delivery of an antique crib she had insisted on buying. Adrian's phone, left on the kitchen island, buzzed incessantly. Isabella glanced at the screen. It was a call from a Genevieve. G.D. Genevieve Dubois. The name hit her like a physical blow. It was her. The ghost from his past was back, and she was pulling the strings of Isabella's present misery. That night, Isabella confronted him again. She found him in the guest room, staring out the window, his silhouette rigid with tension. I know about Genevieve, she said, her voice eerily calm. Adrian spun around, his face paling. What are you talking about, G.D.? The messages on your tablet, the phone calls. You're talking to her again. All this time you've been lying to me. The words tasted like ash. Is she why you can't touch me? Are you leaving me for her? Just be a man and tell me, Adrian. Don't make me live through this lie for one more day. She wanted him to deny it, to laugh and pull her into his arms. Instead, his expression hardened, his jaw setting like granite. You went through my private messages. You left me with no choice. You've abandoned me. What is this protocol you're discussing with her? What positive outcome? The questions tumbled out, laced with hurt and anger. Is she pregnant too? Is that it? Are you trying to decide which family to choose? Stop it, Isabella, he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what you're talking about. This has nothing to do with an affair. Then what is it? She screamed, the sound echoing in the sterile room. What could possibly be worse than that? What have you and that woman cooked up that makes you look at your own pregnant wife with disgust? He took a step towards her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a second, she thought he might finally break. might finally tell her the truth. But the walls went up again, higher and thicker than ever before. Genevieve is a consultant, he said, the lie clumsy on his tongue. She is a specialist in a private medical matter. That's all. It concerns the long-term health of this family, and that's all I can tell you. A private medical matter whose mine? A new chilling fear crept in. Am I sick, Adrian? Is something wrong with the baby? Is that why you won't touch me? Are we contagious? She was half joking, her voice hysterical. But the look on his face stopped her cold. He didn't deny it. He just stared at her with those tormented, pitying eyes. You need to trust me, he said, his voice barely a whisper. This is the hardest thing I have ever had to do, but I am doing it for you. Please, believe that. But she couldn't. Trust was a currency they no longer shared. The involvement of Genevieve Dubois had poisoned everything. Isabella was now convinced of a cruel conspiracy. Adrian and his ex-lover were planning to take her baby. Perhaps they would declare her an unfit mother, using her emotional distress they were causing as proof. It was a monstrous thought, but in the silence of the Sterling mansion, monstrous things seemed possible. She had to fight back, not just for herself, but for her unborn child. To understand the depth of Adrian's deception, one must understand the lie that held him captive. It was a lie of breathtaking cruelty, engineered by two women scorned. Weeks before, just after the first ultrasound, Adrian had received a call from his mother, Beatrice. Her voice was laced with a gravity that immediately set him on edge. Adrian, we need to talk. It's about Isabella, she had said. Something has come to my attention. Something delicate. They met in the sterile quiet of Beatrice's Upper East Side apartment. With her was Genevieve Dubois. Adrian was stunned. He hadn't seen her in nearly a decade. She looked different, harder, her ambition now honed to a razor's edge. She was, he knew, a senior executive at a cutting-edge Swiss biotech firm. Genevieve has some concerns. Beatrice began letting the other woman take the lead. Genevieve's demeanor was one of somber professionalism. She explained that through a mutual acquaintance at a diagnostic lab in Europe, a flag had been raised on some of Isabella's routine prenatal blood work, which had been sent for advanced genetic sequencing as per the premium package Adrian had paid for. It's a condition we've only recently been able to identify. Genevieve said, her voice low and serious. She slid a thick, heavily watermarked file across the table. It's called haploreactive gestational syndrome, or HRGS. The name was fabricated, a meaningless string of scientific-sounding words. But to Adrian, it sounded terrifyingly real. It's an incredibly rare recessive gene, primarily found in certain artistic communities in northern Italy. Genevieve continued a masterful touch, targeting Isabella's specific heritage. The gene itself is dormant, benign, but it has a specific catastrophic trigger: prolonged skin-to-skin contact with the paternal DNA source during gestation. Adrian stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words. Paternal DNA source. You mean me? Yes, Genevieve said gravely. The hormonal changes during pregnancy activate the dormant gene in the mother. When exposed to your cells through touch, hugging, sleeping in the same bed, any sustained contact, a cytotoxic reaction begins. It's painless at first, but it's systemic. It attacks the mother's vascular system, and, tragically, the placental barrier. Beatrice placed a cold hand on her son's arm. "What is she saying in plain English?" Genevieve looked at Adrian, her eyes full of feigned pity. "The prognosis, if the protocol isn't followed, is absolute. The reaction causes a complete breakdown of the placenta late in the second or early in the third trimester. It's fatal for the child, and in over 90% of documented cases, the resulting hemorrhagic shock is fatal for the mother." The air left Adrian's lungs. The room tilted. Fatal. The word slammed into him. Isabella. His baby. Both gone. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible. Her doctors here said she's perfectly healthy." "They wouldn't know to look for it," Genevieve countered smoothly. "HRGS is a discovery from my company's research wing. The diagnostic test is proprietary. American hospitals don't have it. We only caught it because our lab in Zurich is the only one in the world that screens for it." She presented him with charts, graphs, and cellular diagrams, all beautifully forged, all utterly meaningless. But to a layman, they looked like irrefutable proof. "What do we do?" Adrian asked, his voice hoarse. "There must be a treatment. A cure." This was the hook. "There is a protocol," Genevieve said, "and it has a near 100% success rate if followed perfectly. The key is absolute isolation from the paternal trigger. No physical contact. None. Separate rooms, separate beds. It's crucial to halt the progression of the cytotoxic reaction. Then my company has developed an antigen therapy, an infusion that must be administered during the 36th week, which neutralizes the gene permanently. After the birth contact can resume as normal." Beatrice, playing her part to perfection, gasped. "You mean he can't touch his own wife? For the entire pregnancy, it is the only way to save her life," Genevieve said, her tone final. "And the life of his child." Adrian felt like he was drowning. The cruelty of it was Shakespearean. To save his wife and child, he had to become a monster to them. He had to withdraw his love, his comfort, his touch at the very moment she would need it most. He had to inflict unimaginable emotional pain to prevent a catastrophic physical one. "Why would you do this for me, Genevieve?" he asked, a sliver of his old suspicion surfacing. "After everything?" Genevieve's mask of concern was flawless. "Because nobody deserves this, Adrian. And whatever our past, I am a scientist first. I couldn't live with myself if I knew this," and said nothing. Beatrice sealed the deal. "This is a test from God, Adrian. It is a burden you must carry alone. You cannot tell Isabella. The psychological stress could be just as damaging. She would never understand. She would think you're mad. She might even try to touch you to prove you wrong. You must be strong for her. You must be the villain to be her savior." He was trapped. The lie was perfect. A she, built of love and fear. He agreed to everything. He would fund Genevieve's antigen research to the tune of millions of dollars, paid to an offshore account for her discretion. He would follow the protocol to the letter. He would become cold, distant, and cruel, all in the name of saving the two people he loved most in the world. Every pained look from Isabella, every tear she shed, was a knife in his gut. But he held firm, clinging to Genevieve's words. A few months of hardship for a lifetime of health. He was playing a role, the most difficult of his life. He was the lonely guardian of a terrible secret, bearing Isabella's hatred as a shield to protect her from a danger she couldn't see. He had no idea the danger was standing right beside him, wearing a lab coat and a sympathetic smile. Isabella couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. The theory that Adrian and Genevieve were plotting to take her child had taken root in her heart, a poisonous vine strangling all reason. She watched Adrian move through their home, his face etched with a pain she now interpreted as guilt. His torment wasn't for her. It was for the betrayal he was planning. She knew she couldn't survive this alone. She needed an ally, an expert, someone whose authority, Adrian, a man who respected only power and expertise, could not dismiss. She needed the best doctor money could buy. She spent a day researching not just for top obstetricians, but for perinatal specialists, geneticists, the heads of departments at the most prestigious hospitals in the country. One name kept appearing: Dr. Anya Sharma, the chief of maternal fetal medicine at Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan. Dr. Sharma was renowned not just for her clinical skill, but for her work in complex, high-risk pregnancies and her direct, no-nonsense approach. Isabella called the office herself, her voice shaking as she explained she needed a second opinion on a complicated and sensitive matter. The urgency in her tone must have been palpable, because the scheduler found her an appointment for the following week. Now she had to get Adrian there. She approached him that evening, not with accusations or tears, but with a cold, hard resolve that mirrored his own. "I've made an appointment," she said, standing in the doorway of his study. "My assistant handles your appointments, Isabella. Everything is scheduled." "Not with my current doctor," she said. "This is with Dr. Anya Sharma at Lenox Hill. It's for Tuesday at 10 a.m. We are both going." Adrian looked up from his work, his brow furrowed. "That's unnecessary. You have the best care." "The best care isn't working, is it?" she shot back. "Something is wrong, Adrian. You've said it yourself, this is a private medical matter." "Well, I'm done with secrets. We are going to sit in a room with a real expert, and you are going to tell her and me exactly what is going on. Either you come with me, or I will go alone and tell her that my husband believes I am diseased and refuses to touch me." I wonder what a doctor of her standing would make of that. It was an ultimatum, and they both knew it. She saw the panic flash in his eyes. His carefully constructed wall was being threatened by an outside force he couldn't control. "Isabella, you don't understand the risk," he started, his voice pleading. "No," she said, her voice like steel. "You don't understand. I am your wife. This is my body and my child. I will have the truth. Tuesday, 10 a.m. Be there." She turned and walked away, not waiting for a response. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of power. The morning of the appointment was thick with tension. Adrian was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his armor for the battle ahead. He was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he drove them into the city. He tried one last time in the car. "Please, let's not do this," he said. His voice strained. "It's not safe. The safest place for a pregnant woman is with a doctor." "Adrian," she replied, looking out the window. As they walked into the polished, quiet lobby of the maternal fetal medicine unit at Lenox Hill, Adrian's phone buzzed. It was a text from Genevieve. "GD, your mother told me what you're doing. This is a catastrophic mistake. You cannot expose the situation to an outside physician. They are not equipped. You will jeopardize the entire protocol." Leave now." Adrian's blood turned to ice. He looked at Isabella, already checking in at the front desk, her posture determined. He was trapped between two impossible choices: betray the woman who held the supposed cure, or betray the wife who was demanding the truth. He pocketed his phone, his heart hammering against his ribs, and followed his wife down the hall. Dr. Anya Sharma was a woman in her 50s, with intelligent, compassionate eyes and an air of unshakable competence. She listened patiently as Isabella, in a rush of emotion, explained the situation. She didn't recount her theory about Genevieve taking her baby. It sounded too hysterical. Instead, she stuck to the facts. "My husband. For the past 3 months, he has refused to touch me. He sleeps in a separate room. He says he is protecting me, that there's a medical reason for it, but he won't tell me what it is. I am perfectly healthy. My checkups are normal, but he is convinced that something is terribly wrong. I am scared, doctor, and I am so alone." Dr. Sharma nodded, her expression unreadable. She then turned her calm, perceptive gaze to Adrian. "Mr. Sterling, would you care to explain your side of this?" Adrian sat stiffly, his hands clasped on his knees. This was the moment, the point of no return. He swallowed hard. "Doctor," he began, his voice raspy, "I have been privy to information from a specialist in Europe, a biotech firm. They've identified a condition, something my wife has." "And what is this condition called?" Dr. Sharma asked, picking up a pen. Adrian's throat was dry. He could feel Isabella's eyes burning into the side of his face. He had to say it. He had to trust the lie. "It's called haploreactive gestational syndrome, HRGS." Dr. Sharma wrote it down without a flicker of recognition. "I've been in this field for 30 years, Mr. Sterling. I've attended conferences all over the world. I have never heard of it. Please enlighten me." Adrian, clinging to the details Genevieve had drilled into him, began to explain. He spoke of the dormant gene, the northern Italian heritage, the cytotoxic reaction triggered by paternal touch, the breakdown of the placenta, the absolute fatality for mother and child. He explained the entire protocol of isolation. As he spoke, he watched Dr. Sharma's face. He expected to see concern, alarm, perhaps even professional curiosity. He saw none of it. Her calm expression slowly morphed into one of profound, unmistakable disbelief. She wasn't looking at him like he was a concerned husband. She was looking at him like he was a fool. When he finished, the room was silent. Isabella was staring at him, her face a canvas of horror and confusion. This was his secret. This bizarre science fiction plague. Dr. Sharma put down her pen. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Adrian's, and then she delivered the words that would shatter his world. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft but laced with an iron authority, "I have to be very clear with you. What you have just described is not a recognized medical condition. It does not exist." Adrian stared at her. "What? No, that's not possible." "I have the data, the reports. Reports can be falsified," Dr. Sharma said gently. "Let me be more specific. The biological mechanism you described is a scientific impossibility. A mother's body is designed to tolerate the paternal DNA within the fetus. That's the very basis of pregnancy. A cytotoxic reaction triggered by external skin contact with the father. It defies the fundamental principles of immunology and genetics. It sounds like something from a very poorly written movie." She turned to Isabella, Isabella, from all the records I've reviewed, and from what I see here, you are a perfectly healthy woman, having a perfectly normal pregnancy." Then she turned back to Adrian, her gaze sharpening. "Mr. Sterling, you have been fed a lie, a very elaborate and cruel one. There is no such thing as HRGS. There is no danger. Your touch cannot harm your wife or your baby. In fact, the stress and isolation you have inflicted upon her, based on this fiction, is likely the only medical risk present in this room today." Adrian felt the floor drop out from under him. The doctor's words echoed in the sterile air, dismantling his reality piece by piece. A scientific impossibility. Falsified. A lie. He looked at the files he'd brought the data from Genevieve, that he had guarded like a holy text. It was all fake. The millions of dollars. The torment. The self-imposed exile. The cruelty to his wife. All of it based on nothing. He looked at Isabella. Her face was pale tears, streaming silently down her cheeks. But behind the tears was a dawning horror, the realization of the truth. He hadn't been protecting her. He had been torturing her. The blood drained from Adrian's face. A cold sweat broke out on his brow. He felt a wave of nausea so profound he had to grip the arms of his chair to keep from collapsing. The doctor's words replayed in his mind, a very elaborate and cruel lie. And in that moment, seeing the devastation on his wife's face, Adrian Sterling, the titan of industry, the man who could move markets with a word, felt the full crushing weight of his own monumental stupidity. He wasn't a savior. He was a pawn, and he had hurt the only person he had been trying to save. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was utterly devastatingly pale. The drive back from Lenox Hill was a journey through a wasteland. The silence in the car was no longer cold and empty. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the wreckage of Adrian's colossal mistake. Isabella stared out her window, the city a blur of motion she didn't see. The truth was far more insane than any scenario she had imagined. He wasn't having an affair. He wasn't trying to steal their child. He had been convinced that loving her was a death sentence. Adrian drove on autopilot, Dr. Sharma's words echoing in his head. A lie. Falsified. A scientific impossibility. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his pride and self-assuredness. He had built an empire on his ability to read people, to see through deception, to anticipate every move. Yet he had been played masterfully by his own mother and his ex-lover. They hadn't used financial projections or market analysis. They had weaponized his love for his family against him. He risked a glance at Isabella. The tears had stopped, but her face was a mask of grief. He had done this. His refusal to trust her, to include her, to believe in their partnership over the word of a vengeful ex and a manipulative mother, had caused this chasm between them. Bella. He began, his voice cracking. The old pet name felt alien on his tongue. I am so sorry. She didn't turn. Sorry for what, Adrian? She asked, her voice hollow. Sorry for believing I was a walking biohazard. Sorry for putting me through months of psychological torment, or just sorry you got caught. Sorry for all of it. He whispered, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. I thought I was protecting you. I swear to you I believed every word. I was so terrified of losing you. You were losing me anyway. She cut in, finally turning to face him, her eyes flashing with a fire he hadn't seen in months. Every single day you pushed me further away. You could have talked to me, Adrian. We could have faced this together. But you didn't trust me. You trusted her. Genevieve. A woman who hates me. A woman you pushed out of a company. You trusted her over your own wife. He had no defense. She was right. He had been arrogant, thinking he alone could carry this burden. When they arrived back at the penthouse, the atmosphere was charged. As if summoned by the climax of the drama she had set in motion, Beatrice Sterling was waiting for them in the living room, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Adrian, I was so worried. I trust you came to your senses and left that hospital, she said, her voice bright and brittle. Adrian walked past her, his face grim. The appointment was very illuminating, Mother. Beatrice's smile faltered as she saw Isabella's tear-stained face and the thunderous expression on her son's. What happened? The truth happened, Isabella said, finding her voice. The truth about your disgusting, pathological lie. Just then the private elevator chimed and the doors opened. Out stepped Genevieve Dubois, looking sleek and confident. She was holding a briefcase. Adrian, she began, a hint of reprimand in her tone. You have no idea the damage you could have caused today. I came as soon as I could. We need to repair. She stopped as she took in the scene. The jig was up. It was written on all their faces. Adrian turned to face the two women, his architects of misery. The grief on his face was slowly being replaced by a cold, controlled fury, the fury he usually reserved for the boardroom. Haploreactive gestational syndrome. He said the words tasting like poison. Did you enjoy creating it? Did the two of you sit up at night laughing as you invented the most sadistic possible way to tear my family apart? Beatrice drew herself up. We did what was necessary. That woman was not right for you, for our family. Her bloodline is common. I wanted to protect our legacy. My legacy is in this room. Mother, Adrian roared, gesturing wildly towards Isabella. It is my wife and my unborn child. The two people you tried to destroy with this fantasy. He then turned his sights on Genevieve, who stood frozen by the elevator. And you. How much was it? How much did I pay for your proprietary research? 2 million. 3. Was it worth it? Genevieve. Was the revenge that sweet Genevieve, seeing her plan crumble, switched tactics from deceit to venom? You deserved it, Adrian. You built your empire on my ideas, on the company you stole from me. You threw me away. I wanted you to feel a fraction of the powerlessness I felt, and your mother was more than happy to help. Isabella finally spoke, her voice shaking but strong. You didn't just hurt him. You used my pregnancy, my child, as a weapon in your pathetic little vendetta. You are monsters. Both of you. Beatrice scoffed. Don't be so dramatic, dear. It was for the best. That was the final straw for Adrian. He walked over to his mother, his face inches from hers. Get out, he said, his voice dangerously low. Get out of my home and get out of my life. You are no longer my mother. You are a stranger to me. And if you ever try to contact me or my wife again, I will use every ounce of my power to ruin you. He then looked at Genevieve. As for you, my lawyers will be in touch. Expect a lawsuit for fraud that will dismantle your career and your life so thoroughly you'll wish you'd never heard the name Sterling. Now get out. Beatrice paled, genuinely shocked. Genevieve, pragmatic to the end, turned without a word, and stepped back into the elevator. Beatrice lingered, sputtering Adrian. "You can't mean this." "Try me," he snarled. Defeated. Beatrice followed Genevieve into the elevator. The doors slid shut, and they were gone. The silence that returned was different. It was clean. The poison had been excised. But the wound was vast and deep. Adrian turned to Isabella, his face crumbling. All the anger was gone, replaced by a profound, bottomless shame. He looked like a lost boy. "Bella," he whispered. "I know sorry isn't enough. I don't know what is. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to fix this, trying to earn you back." He took a hesitant step towards her, his hand outstretched, not to touch her, but as a plea. For months, he had been forbidden from doing so by a lie. Now he was forbidden by the truth of his own actions. Isabella looked at her husband, the man she loved, the man who had wounded her so deeply. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the agony of his regret. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was a path they would have to walk together. Slowly, deliberately, she took his hand. His skin was warm, real. His touch didn't hurt. It wasn't a poison. It was just a beginning. The confrontation was a detonation, leaving behind a silence more profound and unsettling than the one that had preceded it for months. Beatrice and Genevieve were gone, spectres exorcised from the penthouse, but their poison lingered in the air. Adrian and Isabella stood in the vast living room, separated by a chasm, not of physical distance, but of action and consequence. The truth had set them free from the lie, only to imprison them in a new, more complex reality. Adrian was a man adrift. The core tenets of his existence, his judgment, his control, his ability to protect his family, had been systematically dismantled. He looked at Isabella, truly looked at her for the first time, without the filter of Genevieve's fiction, and saw the full extent of the damage. The exhaustion in her eyes, the protective way she cradled her belly, the slight tremor in her hands. It was all his doing. A wave of self-loathing so potent it was physically nauseating washed over him. He who had vowed to be her shield had been the sword that struck her. Bella. He choked out the name, a shard of glass in his throat. She flinched, a small, almost imperceptible reaction that cut him deeper than any shout could have. "Don't," she whispered, her voice fragile. "I can't. Not right now." She turned and walked towards the master bedroom. Her movements weary, each step an effort. The quiet click of the door shutting was a judgment. The first few days were a masterclass in navigating a shared space as strangers. He would hear her moving about, the soft sounds of her existence, a constant, painful reminder of his failure. He abandoned his suite of offices downtown, telling his stunned executive team he was taking an indefinite leave of absence. He couldn't command an empire when he couldn't even manage the landscape of his own home. He began by moving his belongings back into their bedroom, but his humility was so absolute that he couldn't bring himself to get into their bed. He took the plush chaise lounge in the corner, a piece of furniture they had bought together in a happier time. He would lie there for hours in the dark, watching the slow, even rhythm of her breathing as she slept, a silent, wretched vigil. He knew grand gestures would be hollow. What use was a diamond bracelet to a woman whose trust he had ground to dust? He had to show, not declare. He had to serve. He, a man who had personal chefs on 2 continents, entered their state-of-the-art kitchen with the intention of cooking for her. He found one of her grandmother's old cookbooks and attempted a simple pasta pomodoro. The result was a catastrophe. The sauce was scorched, the pasta was a gelatinous lump, and a fine dusting of flour covered nearly every surface. He stood there in his $1,000 shirt, covered in tomato stains, the titan of industry defeated by a simple meal. When Isabella walked in, drawn by the smell of burning garlic, she stopped dead in her tracks. She looked at the mess, then at him, and for the first time in days, a complex emotion flickered in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall of her grief. He saw a glimmer of the woman who had once found his boardroom seriousness endearing. Without a word, he began to clean up. He scrubbed every pot, wiped every counter, and when the kitchen was pristine again, he quietly ordered from her favorite neighborhood trattoria. They ate in near silence, but he felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. His failure had been more eloquent than any success could have been. It was an admission of his fallibility, a humanizing act that made him seem less like a monster and more like the fool he felt he was. The turning point came a week later. He had spent days not just thinking but researching, trying to understand what he had taken from her. It wasn't just her peace of mind, it was her identity. She was Isabella Rossi. The curator before, she was Isabella Sterling, the millionaire's wife. He had absorbed her into his world, and in doing so had inadvertently erased hers. He found her in the nursery, softly humming to their unborn child. He stood in the doorway, holding a simple leather portfolio. "Isabella," he said, his voice soft, not wanting to startle her. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" She nodded, her hand resting on her belly. He walked in and handed her the portfolio. "I know that what I did, words can't fix it. And money can't fix it, I know that. But I've been thinking about what you've lost. What we lost, and it started long before Genevieve's lies." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside wasn't a stock certificate or a deed to some tropical island. It was a business proposal, a prospectus, and the keys to a physical location. He had acquired a beautiful light-filled gallery space in Soho, a street-level property with soaring ceilings and perfectly weathered brick walls. It was the kind of space she used to dream about. He had also established an endowment for its operation for the first 5 years, insulating it from any financial pressure. "It's yours," he said quietly. "Not as a gift from me to you, but as a way to give you back to yourself. There are no strings. You can run it, sell it, or let it sit empty. It's your space, your world." I just wanted to reopen the door. Tears welled in her eyes. This was an apology, written in a language she understood. It wasn't about the cost, it was about the thought. He saw her the woman she was, the passion that drove her. He wasn't just trying to patch up their marriage. He was trying to restore her soul. She looked from the portfolio to his face and saw a man desperately trying to rebuild a world he had helped demolish. "Thank you, Adrian," she whispered, the first truly warm words she had offered him. The real thaw came that weekend. They were in the living room, a fragile truce holding them in separate orbits. She was on the sofa sketching ideas for the gallery, and he was across the room pretending to read a financial journal. Suddenly the baby gave a kick so powerful it made her gasp. "Wow," she breathed. "He's going to be a soccer player." Adrian's head snapped up, his eyes wide, with a desperate, hopeful longing. For months he had been terrified of this life inside her. Now it was the only thing that felt real and good. Isabella watched his face, saw the raw hunger for connection there. The resentment she harbored warred with a deeper, more primal instinct to share this miracle. She took a breath. Would you like to feel?" He was across the room in an instant, his movements clumsy with eagerness. He knelt before her, his body trembling slightly. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, the phantom fear of Genevieve's lie still echoing in his muscle memory. Then he slowly, reverently placed his palm on her stomach. The space was electric. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a distinct, powerful thump pressed against his hand from within. It was his undoing. A choked sob escaped his lips. The sheer, undeniable fact of his child, alive and strong, crashed against the wall of his guilt and shame. And the wall broke. He rested his forehead against her, and the tears he had held back for months finally came hot and silent. He wasn't just crying for his foolishness. He was crying with overwhelming gratitude for this second chance, for the life he had almost forsaken. Isabella felt his tears soak through her dress. Her own eyes filled. Without thinking, her hand went to his head, her fingers weaving into his hair, holding him. It wasn't a calculated act of forgiveness. It was an impulse of pure empathy. In his brokenness, she found the husband she had fallen in love with, the vulnerable man behind the Titan. That night, they talked. For hours. He confessed the immense pressure of his upbringing, the constant weight of the sterling legacy, his mother's belief that emotion was a liability. She told him of her own fears of feeling like a beautiful object he had acquired, of losing her voice in the echo chamber of their wealth. It was a raw, painful, and utterly necessary conversation. They laid their broken pieces out on the table and together began to see how they might fit back together. Weeks later, when Isabella went into labor, Adrian was no longer a terrified bystander, but an active, engaged partner. He breathed with her, through every contraction. He was her fierce advocate with the hospital staff. He held her, supported her, and drew a strength from her that he never knew he possessed. When their son Leo was born, the nurse, following standard procedure, prepared to place the swaddled infant on Isabella's chest. But Adrian, his eyes filled with a love so pure it was dazzling, asked, "May I?" The nurse handed him his son. He held the tiny 7-pound miracle, looked into his impossibly new eyes, and felt his world recalibrate around a new, unshakable center. He then walked to Isabella's side, leaned down, and gently placed Leo into her waiting arms, creating their first family embrace. He kissed her, a kiss that tasted of salt and relief, and a future they had almost lost. He then kissed his son's head. He was touching them both. His family. Whole, healthy, and finally, truly safe. The sterling legacy wasn't steel and glass. It was flesh and blood, held together by a love that had been tested in the cruelest of fires and had, against all odds, emerged stronger. The story of Adrian and Isabella Sterling is a harrowing reminder that the most damaging lies are often the ones we accept out of fear. It shows that true strength isn't about bearing burdens alone, but about having the courage to trust the one you love. Their journey from a gilded cage of suspicion to a hard-won peace proves that even the deepest wounds can be healed through honesty, forgiveness, and the simple, powerful act of reaching out for another's hand. What did you think of Adrian's impossible choice? Was his mother's manipulation the ultimate betrayal, or was Genevieve's revenge more sinister? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and if you were moved by this story of love, lies, and redemption, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a good story, And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content that will leave you thinking. Thank you for listening.